This is probably the hottest debate in philosophy right now. But what is the mind-body problem, and why do so many people care so much about it? Let's consider. Hello, philosophers. I'm Chico. Welcome to the Philosopher's Show, where we consider the greatest questions of human history. Have you ever been around somebody who is really good at magic tricks and also really good at setting them up? And they'll set it up with some kind of weird, like, I just want to let you know, I've been studying the dark arts, and I've tapped into this mystical mind realm, and I can actually detach parts of my body. So, power of the mind. Power of the mind. And what do you think when you see those kinds of things? Probably, it might be a little bit fun at first to think like, oh, maybe it is magic. But, you start to think there's got to be some other explanation, right? We must be able to explain this in some kind of ordinary way. So it seems like we have a proclivity to natural explanations, which I'm not saying is a bad thing. We live in the realm of the physical, right? And we can describe most of the things that happen using scientific laws. And for the sake of this video and for this little section here, we'll call that things that happen naturally. And when things might happen differently than that, we'll call them supernaturally. Now, if something doesn't happen in the way that we would expect it to naturally, it's not our first impulse to say, oh, it must have been supernatural. What we assume is that it actually happened naturally, but we just couldn't tell. So I'm going to call this the naturalistic tendency. When something seems supernatural, our initial tendency is to assume that it is natural, but that we've made some kind of mistake, either of perception or of judgment or something like that. Again, not saying that this is good or bad, just saying that a lot of people share this kind of tendency. And yet, when we think about the mind, things start to get a little weird. So let's say, for example, you're out, looking at flowers. Let's say you're out recently in San Clemente, where I live. We've had a super bloom of mustard flowers. So you're out in this field of mustard flowers and you experience the color yellow. I might ask you, so where is this experience? And you say, well, obviously it's in my brain, right? It's right there. That's the location. But is it? I mean, if I were to, at that moment that you're looking at the mustard flowers, cut open your skull and take a peek inside there, would I see the color yellow anywhere in there? And yet you are seeing the color yellow. Here's what's weird. You have that color yellow in your mind, but you're in no way physically yellow. So where is this experience? The problem then is that physical things like the brain have some kind of spatial location, but it seems like the things of the mind, things like thoughts, experiences, feelings, don't have a location like that. There's nowhere that you can specifically point to and say, that's it right there. See the experience of yellow? It's right there. Or here's another one. Let's say you get shot in the arm and you say, oh, that hurts. And I say, hey, where's the pain? It seems like you could say, oh, the pain is right here. But then again, if I were to open up your arm and look in there, would I see a pain somewhere? No, there are nerves and bloods and muscles, but there's no pain sitting in there somewhere. Actually, this might help to sort of see what I'm talking about. Have you ever heard of phantom limb? When people will lose like an arm or a leg or something, years later they'll complain that, oh, I've got a pain in my arm, but the arm isn't there. So clearly it's not the case that the pain is in their arm because there is no arm there. So again, it seems like physical things are located at some specific place in space, but the things of the mind, things like thoughts, experiences, feelings of pain, they don't seem to be in some place taking up some space. Here's another weird thing, and I know you probably have heard this already, especially if you're watching philosophy videos, but just bear with me and I'll get to my point in a second. Let's say you're looking at that mustard field and you and I are both looking at it and we say, oh, isn't this beautiful? Look at this lush yellow field. It is really cool. It looks like an impressionist painting up in these hills. But let's say we say, yeah, the flowers are yellow. But what if every time we see that thing that we both call yellow, I'm actually seeing periwinkle and you were seeing the real color yellow? I know, is there really a real color yellow? Let's just set that aside for right now. Would we know that I was seeing the color periwinkle? Well, no. Every time we talked about it, we'd still be calling that same thing yellow, and we can see that yellow thing out there, but what you can't see is my experience of that color. So if my experience is actually a different kind of color, you can't see what I'm seeing. So here's another difference. It seems like physical things are observable. It seems like the things of the mind, like thoughts and experiences, are not observable. Now, you might think, but wait, can't we kind of see somebody's experiences because we could see kind of like their reactions, right? So think about the shot in the arm, right? Somebody gets shot in the arm and they, oh, it hurts, right? So bad. And you can see that anguish on their face and you can say, ah, look, there's the pain. I'm seeing the pain. But then again, think about it. I just did that exact same thing and I'm not in the pain. And so it can't be the case that my facial expressions are identical with the pain. In fact, some people are tougher, way tougher than I am, and they can experience a whole lot of pain and they're very, solid faced about it. My wife is like that. One time we went to the ER and I remember, I think like no big deal. She was pregnant at the time, so I thought, well, we're just going to the ER just to make sure she's okay. She gets there and the nurse asks, how much pain are you in? And she's like, I think I'm about a 9. And I'm like, you're at a 9? What? And I know she's very tough. I mean, she's had children, so I know she knows what a 9 feels like. But on her face, you don't see it. For me, I stub my toe and oh God, it hurts so bad. And my wife's like, you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Just, it's gonna be okay. I don't know. Somehow she can bear that kind of pain without changing the face. So physical things are observable things, at least in principle, right? And in principle, you would be able to observe them. But the things of the mind, experiences, perceptions, feelings, those kinds of things are not observable. And speaking of that pain scale, there's a great Brian Regan on that, by the way. I don't know if the comedian. And he said exactly what I was thinking, which is I always heard, when they ask you like, what is your pain on a scale of 1 to 10? I always thought that 10 is a broken femur, right? Like that's what everybody says. So I've never had a broken femur, but that's got to be the 10. And then childbirth has got to be the 9, right? Because that's got to be really bad. So, but then again, if you say like a 1 through a 3 or a 4, then what are you doing in the ER? So you got to go like 5 to 8, somewhere in that range. But since my wife has already had children, she gets to say that's a 9. But think about how weird that question is in the first place. I mean, in a way you can measure pain because it's like you've had more and you've had less, but you can't measure it quite like you can measure physical things, right? I mean, it's not like you can take that pain and put it on a triple beam and see how much it weighs. No, measurement is taking one thing and comparing it to a second thing, a standard of some kind, like a ruler. But you can't take the things of the mind out to compare them to other things. You can't take your pain out and then, hold it up to some kind of standard and say it's exactly 2 units of pain. For pain, the best you could do is really just to take the experience that you're having right now and compare it to some memory that you have of pain. And then again, you're not even comparing it to the actual pain you've had, but a memory that you have. So physical things can be measured. The things of the mind can't be measured because they can't be observed. They can't be compared to some standard. And part of the reason the mind is unobservable and unmeasurable and those kinds of things, we can all observe the same things because we observe them from this outside perspective that they call the third person perspective. But the mind is something more like something that we look through, right? We have this first person perspective, and that seems to be unique. It seems like we can't have first person perspectives of physical things. Physical things can only be approached from a third person perspective, but the mind comes to us in a first person perspective. All right, go back to the flowers now. Now we're thinking about the flowers, and think about that. We're thinking about flowers. Now, can those flowers be about something else? Does it make sense for me to take a flower and say, what is this about? Or even your neurons. Can your neurons in your brain, can they be about something? Can I say, oh, look at that neuron. It's about a flower. No, physical things can't be about other things. But some of the things of the mind, thoughts, possibly feelings, they can be about something. I can have a thought about flowers. We call this, by the way, in philosophy, intentionality, which is really weird because that word means something totally different usually. So I'll use that word later on in other videos, but I'll try to remind you what that means. So there's this aboutness to some of our things in the mind, the thoughts especially, and it seems like physical things can't have any kind of aboutness to them. And if you want to say, but what about physical words? What about physical words? I'm going to get that to it in a later video. But think about that. Why can't physical words be a counterexample to that? Okay, back to the shot in the arm. Let's say I ask you, hey, oh man, you got shot in the arm. who shot you? And you say, Frank shot me. I can ask the question, what were his reasons for shooting you? And that question makes sense, right? But what if you said, well, it wasn't really Frank. It was Frank's gun. It got knocked off the table. It went off, and that shot me. And then I ask you the question, really? Well, what were the gun's reasons for shooting you? That doesn't sound quite right, right? The gun, and really all physical things, act through some kind of mechanical type of necessity. The jostling causes some mechanism to go with I know the firing pin, right? The firing pin gets moved forward, which causes an explosion, which causes the bullet to move out, which causes your skin to break free, and all kinds of fun things. Only things with minds can act for reasons, and reasons aren't quite like machines, or at least they're only metaphorically like machines. We might say that one idea led to another idea, but we don't mean that that idea jostled forward to the second idea. So it seems like material things can't have reasons, they can't have rational agency. Only minds can. And finally, I could say something like, Frank should not have shot you, right? He made a poor choice. But does it make sense to say that gun should not have shot you, right? It made a poor choice. It doesn't make sense, right? It seems like physical things don't have a choice like we do. Now, some people disagree that there is such a thing as free will, and that's totally fine, right? Really, what I'm doing right now is just setting up the problem of the mind. And really, just at least at first, it seems like we have free will. And later on, when we do philosophy, we may disagree, we may say we don't have. That's not a good reason to believe in a mind or something like that. But at first blush, it seems like something we should take account for. So, material things seem to act with that kind of mechanical necessity, but minds seem to be able to have some kind of free will, so they don't happen with that kind of mechanical necessity. All right. That's a large list of different phenomena that we have about the mind. The mind-body problem then is this. Do I have a mind that is separate and distinct from my brain? At first our naturalistic tendency will kick in and we think, wow, those different things that I just listed off, the mind sure acts a lot different than any kind of physical thing that we see out there. In fact, there's some ways that it acts like physical things can't act. But that sounds kind of ghostly, right? Should we believe in this? So our question again is, do we have non-physical minds? Or are our minds just another word for what our brains are doing? What is the mind, and how does it relate to the brain or the body? By the way, there are other options besides just those two. It's not just that either there's a physical brain and a non-physical mind, or there's just a physical brain. But this is just setting up the mind-body problem. We have a handful of phenomena that seem to point to the idea that the mind is a non-physical thing. And then we have a whole lot of experience with just physical things. And we have to ask the question, should we believe in this, that this mind thing is a non-physical thing, that it's real, that it's separate from this brain? Now, why is it such a hot topic? You probably have already sniffed out the reason, but here it is. The idea of a non-physical mind sounds suspiciously similar to the idea of a soul. And there are people kind of in two camps here. First, there are people that hate the idea of a soul. They often hate the idea of religion, and they hate the idea of heaven or hell or nirvana or something like that. They want everything to be physical and scientific. So they want there to just be a brain. And there's a second group of people that desperately want us to have a soul. Sometimes they believe that the existence of a soul is necessary for the meaning of life because it gives us the possibility of a life after death. Or they believe, there might be religious people and they believe that their religion would be falsified if we don't have a soul. So that's why the mind-body problem is such a big deal. Personally, I don't have a lot of stake here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay out all my cards on the table, which is pretty much 2, so that you'll know where I'm coming from, and then I'll explain to you where I think our attitude should be when we're approaching this problem. First, I should say that I tend to be very skeptical. When somebody makes some kind of mystic claims, I definitely have the naturalistic tendency. I want to figure out some way to explain whatever they just said. And I'm very cautious about such things in philosophy as well. If we're just accepting whatever weird things to explain some phenomena that we have, then we might end up believing in, the mind fairy that, comes and endues us each with minds. So that's definitely something I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing to be very skeptical. However, I also know that there are a lot of weird things out there. Especially, I mean, if you think about like at the subatomic level. I mean, think about the whole idea of an electron and valence shells. Valence shells, right? I mean, they start off by showing you these little balls and saying the electrons go in this orbit, right? That orbital model. And then they say, no, 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 it's not like that at all. It's more like a cloud, right? And then they say, no, 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 it's not quite like that either. You're kind of like, well, what the heck is it like? Well, it's not like anything that you've seen on the macro level. Things in the quantum world and in the, the subatomic world are just bizarre. Or photons, both a wave and a particle. What the heck is that? Well, I can't point to anything out here and say, oh, it's just like that thing, because there really is nothing like that in our experience. So I know that there are very weird things out there. And when I think about reasons to discount things from our philosophy, I can't think of a reason before we start doing philosophy to discount the possibility of non-physical things, specifically the idea of a mind. So that's my first card, is the skeptic card, and I do my best to keep that, in the right place. My second card is that I am a Christian, so my faith, I believe in God, I believe the Bible is the Word of God. So you might think, oh, well, then this guy has to believe in a soul, right? But really, for me, all I need to believe in is a bodily, physical resurrection. So whether a soul goes along with that or not really is inconsequential for me. In fact, I know Christian philosophers who don't believe in a soul. So although I am a Christian, that doesn't mean that I have to believe in a soul. Admittedly, I do have to believe in at least one non-physical entity, which would be God. But in the mind-body problem, I pretty much don't have a dog in that fight. Which is, by the way, that a terrible saying. But I had an officer from Kentucky that used to always say that. He was my boss. And I don't know. I picked it up. I apologize. I don't believe in dog fights. So here's how I think that we should approach the mind-body problem. First, I would say that we should be skeptically open-minded. I don't think we should believe in a soul just because it solves a lot of problems. But I also think we should be open to its existence, even if it doesn't fit neatly into any of our categories that we're used to. Again, plenty of weird things in the universe. There's no reason that a soul can't be one of them. Secondly, if you're religious or even irreligious, I don't think necessarily this has to be a big problem. I think we can approach this a little bit more openly. And here's what I mean. If you're irreligious, you might think, oh, I can't have there be a soul existing. If there's a soul existing, that means heaven and hell and God and all those things. Well, no, not necessarily. You could actually believe that a soul exists and that it depends upon the body, and then when we die, it disappears. And you can believe that without believing some kind of heaven and hell. If you are religious, I've already said that Christians don't really have to believe in a soul because they believe in the physical resurrection. But Muslims and Jews are pretty much on the same footing. And for Buddhists and Hindus, most believe that Atman is Brahman or something like that. That the entire universe is Maya, is illusion. So really, you don't have to believe in a soul because you can already believe that the body is like a soul. Now, that's not to say that no religion needs a soul, right? There might be some religion, I don't know, I might be wrong on this, but there might be religions out there that require the existence of a soul to be correct. And there's a big question about, what do we do if the evidence presented is contrary to our religion? Do we compromise the religion? Do we just plug our ears and not believe it? Do we throw out the religion? What do we do? My big point here is that for most of us, the mind-body problem doesn't need to be one of those cases. So we can save those questions for philosophy of religion, and we can proceed on the mind-body problem without having to worry too much. So again, that is the mind-body problem and why it's such a big deal in philosophy today. As I like to say, I think the best philosophy happens in dialogue, so let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think that there is a mind? What would constitute enough evidence for believing in a mind? And don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment, and tag your friends so that they can join this conversation. That's all I got for today. Adios.